My father declared I had zero tech talent and that my sister was the heir. I believed him until his urgent plea hit my inbox. Now, he is walking into my building to beg a CEO for salvation. Unaware he is pitching the daughter he discarded, but the shock wasn't the meeting. It was finding a 3-letter folder in his code proving his breakthrough product was actually mine, right before an old shoebox arrived at my door. My name is Constance Hunter, and at 33 years old, I have learned that the only currency that never fluctuates is control. From the 45th floor of the Glass Wren Analytics headquarters, the city of Chicago looks less like a chaotic sprawl of humanity and more like a circuit board, humming with data that most people are too busy to notice. Below me, the slate-gray waters of Lake Michigan churn against the shoreline, a vast, cold expanse that reminds me daily of where I came from and how far I have run to escape it. My office is a fortress of tempered glass and steel, designed to strip away the noise and leave only the essential truth of numbers. I built this, I own this, and nobody here knows that the woman staring out at the horizon used to be a girl who was told she would never amount to anything more than a footnote in someone else's success story. The silence of my office was broken not by a knock, but by the soft, deliberate click of the door latch. I did not turn around. Only one person has the clearance to enter without announcing herself. And only one person knows exactly when to interrupt my thoughts. Marisol Grant stood by the door, tablet in hand. She is my chief operating officer, a woman who speaks rarely but sees everything. Marisol has a terrifying gift. She can smell desperation in an email subject line from 1,000 miles away. She does not waste time with pleasantries or corporate jargon. She simply walks in, places the kill on the table, and waits for me to carve it up. "You have a flag on the priority inbox," Marisol said, her voice low and devoid of unnecessary inflection. "It came in 20 minutes ago. It bypassed the general screening because the algorithm marked it as a distress signal disguised as a partnership opportunity." I turned then, walking over to my desk, a single slab of black marble that cost more than the first house I lived in after I left home. I sat down and woke the screen. Marisol had already isolated the file. The subject line read, "Strategic Alliance Proposal, Hunter Ridge Systems." My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I have spent 10 years training my body to reject the physiological symptoms of fear. Instead, a cold, almost metallic sensation settled in the center of my chest. I knew that name, I knew that company, and I knew the man who built it. Hunter Ridge Systems, Kansas City. I tapped the screen, expanding the dossier Marisol had already compiled in the last 20 minutes. She is efficient to the point of being lethal. The summary was a graveyard of red ink. I scanned the numbers, translating them instantly into the narrative of a dying animal. Revenue was in freefall, dropping nearly 40% over the last 3 quarters. Client retention had plummeted. Their burn rate was astronomical. Likely due to executive salaries and legacy infrastructure costs, they refused to cut. Based on my quick mental math, they had perhaps 3 months of cash left before they missed payroll. Maybe 4, if they stopped paying their vendors. "They are looking for a lifeline," I said, my voice steady, though the air in the room felt suddenly thin. "They want a meeting. They want a savior," Marisol corrected, stepping closer to the desk. "They are asking for a face-to-face in Chicago within 48 hours. They claim they have a breakthrough integration for our platform, something that will revolutionize our data processing speed." I scoffed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet room. I scrolled down to the bottom of the email, past the desperate corporate buzzwords, past the inflated projections of synergy and mutual growth. My eyes locked on the signature block at the bottom. Dean Hunter, founder and CEO. My father. The pixels on the screen seemed to vibrate. Dean Hunter, the man who had sat at the head of our dinner table and told me, with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather, that I simply did not have the mind for technology. He had looked right through me then. Just as he was looking right through me now, he had no idea that the CEO of Glass Wren Analytics, the industry titan he was begging for a meeting, was the daughter he had written off 2 decades ago, to him. I was just a faceless executive in a high-rise, a checkbook that could keep his legacy alive for another fiscal year. Marisol was watching me. She noticed the pause. She noticed the way my finger hovered over the trackpad. She did not know he was my father. I had scrubbed my history so thoroughly that even the NSA would have trouble connecting Constance Hunter of Chicago to the unremarked daughter of a Kansas City tech entrepreneur. But she knew something was off. "Do we decline?" Marisol asked. "I can have a rejection drafted in 5 minutes. We do not need their tech. Their architecture is 10 years out of date." "No," I said. The word came out softer than I intended. So I repeated it, sharper this time. "No, we take the meeting." Marisol raised an eyebrow, a microscopic display of surprise. "You want to entertain a company that is technically insolvent? I want to see what they have to sell." I lied. Or maybe it was not a lie. I wanted to see them sell it. I wanted to watch Dean Hunter sit across from me and sweat. I wanted to see if he could recognize his own blood when it was wearing a $5,000 suit and holding the keys to his survival. "Set it up for Thursday," I commanded, leaning back in my chair. "But there are conditions. Reply to the email yourself. Tell them the CEO of Glassren agrees to a preliminary 30-minute window. Do not include my bio. Do not include a link to my profile. Do not attach a photo. Sign the confirmation simply as Constance, CEO. If they ask for a full name for security, tell them they will be cleared at the front desk upon arrival." Marisol nodded, tapping the note into her tablet. She did not ask why. She never asks why, only how. "And Marisol," I added, stopping her before she could turn to leave, "I want a full forensic due diligence package on Hunter Ridge before they step into the elevator. I want to know their debt structure, their employee turnover rate for the last 5 years, and the compensation packages of their C-suite. But more than that, I want the technical history of their core product." "The core product?" Marisol asked. "Yes. I want to know exactly when their flagship software was built, who committed the original code, and why it has not had a major update in 3 years. Dig deep. I want to know where the bones are buried. Consider it done," she said. She turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me alone with the view. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights were beginning to flicker on as the twilight deepened over Lake Michigan. The glass was cold against my forehead as I leaned forward, looking down at the tiny cars moving in gridlock far below. Dean Hunter was coming here. He was walking into a trap of his own making, driven by arrogance and desperation. He thought he was coming to manipulate a stranger. He did not know he was walking into the courtroom of a judge he had dismissed long ago. I pressed my hand against the glass, my reflection ghosting over the darkening skyline. My face was harder now than it had been at 14. My eyes were colder. I had spent half my life building a fortress to keep people like him out, and now I was lowering the drawbridge to let him in. The question that lingered in the silence of my office was not whether I could destroy him. I knew I could. The numbers on my screen told me he was already dead. He just hadn't stopped moving yet. The question was far more dangerous, and it chilled me more than the wind whipping off the lake. When he walks through that door, when he looks me in the eye and realizes that the power he worships is held by the daughter he discarded. What kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be the daughter who seeks validation, or the stranger who delivers the execution? I watched the lights of the city blur as the fog rolled in, knowing that in 48 hours, I would have my answer. I was 14 years old when I bought my first laptop. It was a brick of a machine, a refurbished gray block that hummed like a dying lawnmower and generated enough heat to warm a small room. I had saved for 8 months, hoarding lunch money and mowing lawns in our upscale neighborhood, hiding the cash in a hollowed-out biology textbook so my sister would not find it. To anyone else, it was junk. To me, it was a portal. I spent that entire summer indoors, ignoring the pool parties and the country club invites. I taught myself Python and C++ from pirated PDFs I found on forums. It was not just about typing commands. It was about logic. It was about building a structure where every piece had a purpose. where if you made a mistake, the machine told you exactly where it was. It was fair. It was consistent. It was everything my house was not. By August, I had built my first functional program. It was simple, a database tool that could organize and cross-reference our home library by genre, author, and publication date, but I had coded the interface from scratch. I was proud. The feeling was physical, a tightness in my chest that felt like helium. I waited for a Sunday afternoon when my father, Dean, was in his study. The door was open. I walked in. The heavy laptop balanced on my forearms. He was reading a report, a glass of iced tea sweating on a coaster beside him. "Dad," I said, "I want to show you something." He did not look up immediately. He finished the paragraph he was reading, then marked the page with a gold pen before turning his chair. He looked at the clunky machine in my arms, then at my face. "What is it, Constance?" I set the laptop on the edge of his mahogany desk. I ran the script. The screen flickered, and my interface popped up. I typed in a query, Hemingway, and the list populated instantly. "I built this," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to keep it steady. "It is a sorting algorithm. I wrote the code myself." He stared at the screen for perhaps 5 seconds. The silence stretched, elastic and thin. I waited for him to ask how I did it. I waited for him to see the logic, the elegance of the back end. Instead, he chuckled. It was a soft, airy sound. "That is fun." "Connie," he said, using the nickname I hated. "It looks like a video game. Good for you for finding a hobby that keeps you quiet." He turned back to his report. "It is not a game," I started to say. But the heir had already left the room. He had not yelled. He had not told me it was bad. He had done something far worse. He had decided it was insignificant. It was a toy. I was a child playing with blocks while the adults built skyscrapers. I picked up the laptop, the heat of the battery burning my skin, and walked out. He never saw me leave. That was the dynamic. It was not abusive. It was dismissive. And the dismissal was made sharper by the blinding light he shone on my sister. Brooke was 4 years older than me, and she was everything Dean Hunter wanted in an heir. She was loud, charismatic, and could command a room just by walking into it. She did not know a line of code from a grocery list, but she knew how to make people feel important. She was the handshake. I was the blueprint. And in our house, the handshake was the only thing that mattered. The night Brooke graduated from college, my father staged a dinner to announce the succession plan. It was just the 4 of us, sitting at the long dining table under the crystal chandelier that always seemed too big for the room. My mother, Diane, had cooked a roast, but she barely ate. She sat at the end of the table, her eyes moving between Dean and me, bracing for an impact only she seemed to anticipate. Dean stood up, raising a glass of vintage Cabernet. "To Brooke," he announced, his voice booming with pride, "my right hand. Starting Monday, she joins the executive track as Vice President of Operations. Hunter Ridge Systems finally has its future secure." Brooke beamed, feigning surprise, though I knew they had been discussing this for months. She clinked her glass against his. I sat there, gripping my fork until my knuckles turned white. I was 18. I had just finished my first year of college courses while still in high school. I had higher grades than Brooke ever had. "What about me?" I asked. The clinking of glass stopped. Dean looked down at me, his smile not fading, but changing. It shifted from pride to a patient, condescending pity. "You?" he asked, as if the concept was genuinely puzzling. "Connie, sweetheart, you are not built for this world. I am top of my class in calculus." I argued, my voice rising. "I understand the product better than Brooke does. It is not about math." "Constance," he said, his tone dropping to that reasonable, adult level that made me want to scream. "Business is about people. It is about pressure. You are sensitive. You are creative. You would crumble under the weight of what we do. I am protecting you. Brooke has the instinct. You have the imagination. Let's not confuse the two." He took a sip of his wine, signaling the end of the discussion. I looked at my mother. She was cutting her meat, her eyes fixed on her plate. She did not speak. She lived her life in the shadow of his certainty, existing to keep the peace, to smooth over the rough edges he left behind. Later that night, she found me in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing a pot that was already clean. She stood beside me, picking up a towel to dry. She did not look at me directly. "He does not mean to be cruel," she whispered. "He just sees what he wants to see." "That does not make it true," I said, scrubbing harder. "I know," she said softly. "I know. Constance." It was a small crumb of validation, but it was not enough to feed the hunger he was starving. The final cut came 6 months later, at the annual holiday party. The house was full of investors and board members. I was standing near the fireplace, holding a sparkling water, trying to be invisible. Dean was holding court in the center of the room, a scotch in one hand, his other arm draped around Brooke's shoulders. A man I did not recognize, maybe a venture capitalist from the coast, asked about his children. "2 girls," Dean boomed. "You have met Brooke. She is a shark. She is going to eat this industry alive." "And the younger one?" the man asked, gesturing vaguely in my direction. Dean laughed. It was a performance, a joke shared between men of the world. "Constance? Oh, she is the artist of the family. Great imagination. But she would probably apologize to a server for crashing. Not exactly tech material. We let her do her own thing." The circle of men laughed. It was a polite, low rumble of amusement. They were laughing at the idea of me. They were laughing at my irrelevance. I felt a coldness settle over me then, a layer of ice that would not melt for 10 years. I walked out of the room, went upstairs to my bedroom, and pulled a thick envelope out from under my mattress. It was an acceptance letter from the Lakefront Institute of Computing. They had offered me a full scholarship. It was one of the most prestigious technical programs in the country, a place that churned out the architects of the digital age. I had received it 3 days ago. I had planned to show it to him tonight. I had planned to slam it on the table and prove that the world saw value where he saw a void. But standing there in the dark, listening to the laughter drifting up from the living room, I realized it would not matter if I showed him. He would say it was a fluke. He would say the standards had lowered. He would say it was a nice school for theory, not for the real world. He would take my achievement and shrink it until it fit into the small box he had built for me. I did not go back downstairs. I packed a bag. That was the night I understood the mechanics of his cruelty. It did not require shouting. It did not require physical blows. The most effective way to destroy a person is simply to refuse to see them. He had decided who I was: weak, soft, incapable, and no amount of evidence would ever change his mind. So, I decided I would stop trying to change his mind. I would change my name. I would change my city. And one day, I would change the locks on the industry he thought he owned. I looked at the acceptance letter one last time, traced the embossed logo with my thumb, and then tucked it into my bag. I would go to Lakefront. I would become the engineer he said I could never be. But he would never get the credit for it. The cruelty was quiet. My departure would be quieter. But the return? The return would be loud enough to shatter glass. I left Kansas City with 2 suitcases, a savings account that barely scraped $4,000, and a burning desire to be invisible. I chose Chicago not because of the romance of the wind or the architecture, but because it was a city of industry, a place where people kept their heads down and walked fast against the cold. It was a place where a girl from the Midwest could disappear into the static of 5 million other lives. I rented a studio apartment in a neighborhood that was polite enough by day and questionable by night. It smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and floor wax, but it had a high-speed internet connection, and that was the only utility I cared about. For the next 4 years, I did not live. I processed. I treated the Lakefront Institute of Computing like a combat zone. While other students were networking at mixers or complaining about the workload, I was in the server labs at 3 a.m, optimizing queries until my eyes burned. I stopped eating regular meals, surviving on protein bars and instant coffee, fueling my body just enough to keep the brain running. My capstone project was not just an assignment, it was an obsession. I called it the Adaptive Data Sharding Protocol. It was a method for breaking down massive, chaotic enterprise datasets into clean, usable streams without losing processing speed. It was the digital equivalent of taking a hoarding situation and turning it into a library in milliseconds. It was elegant, it was robust, and it was the skeleton key to the future I was trying to build. When I graduated, I did not walk across the stage to wave at a family who wasn't there. I had my diploma mailed to my P.O. box. I put on a suit that I had bought from a discount rack. It was a little too loose in the shoulders, and I went to pitch my life's work to the venture capital firms of Chicago. That was when the real education began. I pitched to 23 firms in 6 months. I pitched to rooms full of men who looked exactly like my father. They wore the same watches, used the same golf metaphors, and looked at me with the same glazed indifference. The feedback was a broken record of biases. "You are a solo founder," one said, tapping his pen on my executive summary. "That is a risk. Where is your technical co-founder?" "I am the technical founder," I replied. He smiled, a tight, patronizing expression. "I mean the heavy lifter, the architect. You are 22. Constance, this architecture claims to solve latency issues that IBM struggles with. You expect us to believe you wrote this in your dorm room?" Another one told me I lacked executive presence. Another said my projected burn rate was too conservative, which meant I wasn't hungry enough. They wanted a showman. They wanted someone who would jump on the table and promise them a 10 times return in 18 months. I promised them stability and efficiency. I was selling plumbing to people who wanted to buy fireworks. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday in November. I had just been walked out of a meeting with a boutique firm on Wacker Drive. The junior partner hadn't even let me finish my demo. He had checked his phone 3 times and then told me that the enterprise data market was oversaturated and that I should consider pivoting to something more consumer-friendly, maybe a dating app or a shopping assistant. I walked to my car, a rusted sedan I had bought for $800. The sky was that flat, bruised gray of a Chicago winter afternoon. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, and the silence of the car felt heavy, like physical pressure. I cried. It was not a cinematic weeping. It was a single, sharp convulsion of the chest, followed by hot tears that leaked out before I could stop them. I felt small. I felt exactly like the 14-year-old girl standing in her father's study, holding a laptop that was too heavy, waiting for approval that would never come. For 60 seconds, I let myself be her. I let myself feel the crushing weight of being unseen. Then, I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 1 minute was enough. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat and sent a follow-up email to the 24th name on my list. Tears were a biological inefficiency. I did not have the budget for them. The 24th name was Ruth Caldwell. Ruth was a myth in the Midwest tech scene. She was an angel investor who had made her fortune in logistics software in the 80s, back when women were essentially clerical errors in the industry. She did not take meetings. She did not do lunch. But somehow, my cold email, stripped of all buzzwords, containing only the raw metrics of my protocol, got through. Her assistant gave me 10 minutes. I walked into her office, which was shockingly small and cluttered with books. Ruth sat behind a desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a library. She was 60, with steel gray hair cut short and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. "Start," she said. "Do not sell me. Just explain it." I did not use my pitch deck. I pulled up the command line. I ran a simulation using a dummy dataset of 5 million retail transactions. I showed her the query speed. Then I showed her the compression rate. She watched the screen. She did not blink. When the simulation finished, she stayed silent for a long time. "Do it again with 10 million records," she ordered. I did. The system held. Ruth leaned back in her chair. Taking off her reading glasses, she looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time. "I have been waiting for someone like you," she said. Her voice was raspier than I expected. Everyone else walks in here with a slide deck full of cartoons and promises about changing the world. You walked in here with a shovel and showed me how you dig." She opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "I am in," she said. "But I have one condition." I waited, expecting her to ask for 50% equity or a board seat for her nephew. "Your name," she said, tapping the folder where my resume sat. "Hunter. It sounds like old money. It sounds like country clubs and legacy hires. It sounds heavy." I stiffened. She did not know my father, but she had instinctively identified the frequency I was trying to block out. "If I back you," she continued, "you are not Constance Hunter, daughter of whoever. You are just the product. The data speaks. The code speaks. You stay behind the curtain. We build a brand that sounds like it fell out of the sky. Fully formed. No personality cults. Just performance." I looked at the check she was writing. It was for $200,000. It was freedom. "Done," I said. We named it Glass Wren Analytics. Glass for transparency. Wren for the bird that is small, overlooked, but moves faster than anything else in the forest. We started in a sublet basement with no windows. I hired 2 engineers who were brilliant but socially awkward. People who had been rejected just like I had. We worked 18 hours a day. We slept on beanbags. We ate pizza that tasted like cardboard. And we built. The first year, we did $500,000 in revenue. The second year, $4 million. By the 5th year, Glass Wren was the silent engine running the back end of 3 major banks and a healthcare conglomerate. We moved to the 45th floor. The press started asking who the CEO was. Ruth kept her promise. We released only my first name and a bio that was so sterile it could have applied to a robot. I became a ghost. I stopped going home for holidays. I stopped answering the rare, obligatory emails from my mother. I erased Constance Hunter from the world and replaced her with the entity that sat in the corner office, even Marisol, who I hired as my second-in-command during our 3rd year. Does not know the truth. She thinks I am an orphan or estranged from a family of nobodies. She respects the silence, so she does not pry. She sees the scars on my armor, but she does not ask who held the knife. I stood in my office, looking at the city I had conquered. Glass Wren was now valued at over $1 billion. I had everything my father said I would never have. I had power. I had respect. I had the tech talent he swore I lacked. But as I prepared for the meeting that would bring him back into my orbit, I realized that Ruth's condition had been more than a branding strategy. It had been a shield. And in 48 hours, I was going to drop it. The digital file for Hunter Ridge Systems lay open on the 80-inch monitor in my private conference room. It was 2 a.m. Marisol had gone home hours ago, leaving me with a pot of black coffee and the silence of the 45th floor. I did not read the proposal like a potential partner. I read it like a forensic pathologist examining a body that was still warm but technically dead. I scrolled through the executive summary. The language was flowery, desperate, and filled with the kind of buzzwords that people use when they have run out of ideas. They spoke of synergy and paradigm shifts, but when I stripped away the adjectives, the numbers bled red. I zoomed in on the section detailing their core technology. They called it Core Weave. According to the documentation, Core Weave was a proprietary data structuring engine designed to handle high-volume enterprise logic. The marketing copy claimed it was unrivaled and adaptive, but as I looked at the version history included in the technical appendix, a detail Marisol had demanded and they had foolishly provided, I saw the truth. The last major architectural update was 3 years ago. In the world of data analytics, 3 years is a geological epoch. 3 years meant they were running on legacy code. It meant they were patching holes in a sinking ship rather than building a new hull. Why would a company founded by a visionary like Dean Hunter stop innovating on its flagship product? The answer was hidden in the client acquisition chart. I pulled up the graph. It was a steep, jagged line pointing down. Hunter Ridge had lost 40% of its key accounts in the last 18 months. I cross-referenced the names of the defecting clients: huge logistical firms, regional banks, a hospital network. I ran a quick search on where they had gone. The answer was consistent. Kestrel Dynamics. Kestrel was a competitor I knew well. They were aggressive, younger, and known for undercutting prices to seize market share. But for them to poach clients from a legacy firm like Hunter Ridge so quickly meant they weren't just cheaper. They knew exactly where Hunter Ridge was weak. They were striking with surgical precision, targeting clients right before their contracts were up for renewal. It smelled like a leak. But that was not my problem to solve. My problem was determining if there was anything left to salvage. I swiped the screen to the leadership bios. There he was, Dean Hunter. His photo was professional, airbrushed to hide the gray that I knew must be overtaking his temples. He looked authoritative, the steady hand on the wheel, but the text below his picture was sparse on recent achievements. It listed awards from 10 years ago. It spoke of founding principles rather than current victories. I swiped left. Brooke Hunter Carlisle, Chief Operating Officer. My sister's face smiled back at me. She looked remarkably like our mother, but with Dean's hardness around the eyes. Her bio was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. It listed her as a strategic visionary, responsible for streamlining operational efficiency and cultivating company culture. I looked at the operational costs on the other screen. If Brooke was streamlining efficiency, she was doing a terrible job. Overhead was up 20% while revenue was down. Her culture seemed to consist of burning cash on executive retreats and branding consultants, while the engineering team starved. It was exactly what I expected. She was playing business. She was the golden child who had been handed the keys to the kingdom and was now confused why the engine wouldn't start. Then, I saw a face I didn't recognize. Victor Hale, member of the board of directors. I paused, tapping on his profile. Victor Hale was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom. Perfect teeth, expensive suit, eyes that seemed to be assessing the resale value of everything they looked at. His background was in private equity and distressed asset management. I knew his type. Victor Hale was a vulture. He wasn't there to save Hunter Ridge. He was there to strip the copper wiring out of the walls before the building collapsed. He was the kind of man who stood with the wind. If he was on the board, it meant the sharks were not just circling, they were already in the water. I picked up my phone and dictated a voice memo to Marisol. Marisol, regarding the Hunter Ridge meeting, I want the full lineup. Tell them we require the presence of Dean Hunter, Brooke Hunter Carlisle, and Victor Hale. No proxies, no dial-ins. I paused, looking at the city lights reflecting in the glass, and Marisol. Tell them to bring the full technical schematics for CoreWeave. I want them to present it to me as if they are selling the patent. I want to see them sweat for it. I set the phone down. The request for Victor Hale was a calculated risk. Dean would want to keep this in the family. Brooke would want to control the narrative. But Victor? Victor would be looking for an exit strategy. If I put pressure on him, he might crack. He might reveal just how bad things really were. I did not sleep that night. I went back to my apartment, a minimalist penthouse that felt more like a gallery than a home. I paced the floor, the plush carpet silencing my footsteps. My mind was a loop of scenarios. I practiced what I would say. I practiced how I would sit. I practiced the exact degree of uninterest I would show when Dean walked in. I had to be perfect. I had to be the thing he said I couldn't be. Cold, hard, and untouchable. I walked into my closet and chose my armor for the next day. A navy blue suit, tailored to within a millimeter of perfection. Sharp lines, no softness. I chose heels that clicked with authority on marble floors. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun, exposing my face, daring them to look at me and see the girl they used to know. But as I stood in front of the mirror at 4 a.m, the adrenaline began to curdle into something else. It wasn't fear. I was not afraid of them anymore. It was a heavy, suffocating sense of finality. For 10 years, I had run on the fuel of, I will show them. It was a clean, hot-burning energy. But now that the moment was here, now that the showing them was about to happen, I realized that after tomorrow, that fuel would be gone. Once I revealed myself, the mystery was over. The game changed. I wouldn't be the ghost haunting their periphery anymore. I would be the reality standing in their way. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the sheer electrical charge of anticipation. I looked at the digital calendar on the wall. Thursday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Strategic alignment. Glassren/Hunter Ridge. The block of time sat there, innocent and gray on the screen. It looked like any other meeting. It looked like a routine business transaction, but to me, it vibrated. It was the singularity point of my entire adult life. Everything I had built, every line of code I had written, every tear I had swallowed in a parking lot, had been leading to that 1 hour. The lightning had already flashed. The sky had split open years ago when I walked out of my father's house. I had been counting the seconds ever since, waiting for the sound to catch up to the light. I took a sip of water and stared at the time slot. The silence in the apartment was absolute, but in my head, I could already hear it. The thunder was about to arrive. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open, and Marisol stepped aside to let them in. The air in the room shifted instantly, charged with the peculiar electricity of people who are pretending they are not drowning. Dean Hunter walked in first. Time had not been kind to him, but money had done its best to cover the damage. His suit was Italian, immaculate, and navy blue. His hair was silver, coiffed into the same aggressive sweep I remembered from childhood. But the skin around his jaw was looser, and there was a tremor in his hand that he tried to hide by gripping his leather portfolio too tightly. He looked at me, and I saw nothing, no spark of recognition, no stumble in his step. To him, I was just a silhouette against the window, a checkbook with a heartbeat. He extended his hand. "Ms. Hunter," he said, his voice practicing that baritone warmth he used on investors. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. It is a pleasure." I took his hand. His skin was dry and cool. This was the hand that had signed my report cards with a sigh. This was the hand that had pointed to the door. I squeezed it firmly, once, and let go. "The pleasure is mine," I said. My voice was lower than it had been at 18. Stripped of the desperate pitch of a daughter seeking approval, Brooke followed him. She was sharper, her edges defined by anxiety. She wore a cream-colored suit that looked expensive but uncomfortable. She took my hand, and for a second, her eyes narrowed. She held the grip a fraction of a second too long, her gaze flicking over my cheekbones, my nose. A shadow of familiarity passed over her face, a ghost of a memory rattling a locked door, but she blinked it away. She could not reconcile the sister she remembered, the one she pitied, with the woman standing at the head of a mahogany table in a 45th floor sanctuary. She forced a professional smile, sealing the crack in her perception, and Victor Hale brought up the rear. He did not smile. He nodded, a quick, efficient gesture that cost him nothing. He sat down immediately, opening a notebook and clicking a pen, his eyes scanning me not as a person, but as a variable in an equation he was trying to solve. "Please," I said, gesturing to the chairs opposite me. "Sit." They sat. The dynamic was instant. Dean took the center chair. Brooke took his right. Victor sat slightly apart on his left, distancing himself from the blast radius. Dean cleared his throat and began. "Constance," he started, using my first name with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. "We are here because we see a unique intersection between Glassren's data capabilities and Hunter Ridge's legacy architecture. We are not looking for a bailout. We are looking for a strategic partner to help us scale our next chapter." He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up. For 20 minutes, I watched my father perform. It was a masterclass in denial. He spoke of market headwinds when he meant obsolescence. He used the phrase strategic customer repositioning to describe the fact that 40% of his revenue had walked out the door. He projected confidence, but I could hear the strain in his vocal cords. He was terrified. He was a man standing on a burning deck, selling tickets to the view. Then it was Brooke's turn. She stood up to discuss operations. If Dean was a tragic figure, Brooke was simply heartbreaking. She recited her lines like a student who had memorized a textbook without understanding the subject. She threw out terms like agile methodology and vertical integration in sentences that made no grammatical or logical sense. She showed a slide of an organizational chart that was top-heavy and inefficient. Pointing to it as a model of streamlined leadership, I watched her, and the anger I expected to feel did not come. Instead, I felt a deep, cold sadness. She was 40 years old, and she was still trying to be what he wanted her to be. She was drowning in a suit that didn't fit, playing a role she hadn't chosen, all to please a man who was currently lying to my face. Victor Hale did not speak. He just watched me watching them. He saw that I wasn't taking notes. He saw that I wasn't looking at the slides. He saw that I was looking at their faces. He narrowed his eyes, sensing a predator in the room, but he couldn't figure out where the teeth were. When Brooke finished, the room fell silent. The hum of the projector fan was the only sound. Dean leaned forward, his smile tight. "So," he said, "that is the overview. We believe an infusion of $50 million for a 20% stake would allow us to unlock the full potential of CoreWeave and integrate it with your analytics engine. It is a win-win." I did not answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. I let it grow heavy. I let it fill the room like concrete pouring in from the vents. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Dean's smile began to tremble. Brooke shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to Victor. Victor stopped clicking his pen. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. "Your presentation is excellent, Dean," I said softly. He exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you. We worked hard on—" "But," I interrupted, my voice sharpening, "it leaves out some key historical context." Dean blinked. "Context?" I stood up and walked to the window, keeping my back to them for a moment. "I am curious about the origins of your company culture," I said, looking out at the gray water of Lake Michigan. "I read that you value instinct over technical skill, that you believe some people are born for this business, and others are simply not built for the pressure." Dean laughed nervously. "Well, every company has a philosophy. We believe in strong leadership." I turned around to face them. "Do you remember the house on Elm Street?" I asked. "The one with the cedar study that always smelled of tobacco and old paper?" The air left the room. Dean froze. The smile slid off his face like wet clay. "Excuse me?" he whispered. "The study where you told a 14-year-old girl that her code was just a game." I continued, stepping closer to the table. "The dining room where you toasted your successor and forgot to set a place for your other daughter's ambition. The hallway where you laughed with your investors about the artist of the family who wasn't tech material." Brooke gasped. It was a sharp, strangled sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. Dean was staring at me, his eyes wide, struggling to process the visual data in front of him against the audio data he was hearing. His brain was rejecting the impossibility of it. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "How do you know about—" I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany table and leaned in, looking him directly in the eyes. "I am the one who wasn't built for this world," I said. "I am the one who was too sensitive. I am the one you erased." I paused, letting the words hang there like a guillotine blade. "My name is Constance Hunter, and you, Dean Hunter, are my father." The reaction was a slow-motion collapse. Dean slumped back in his chair as if his strings had been cut. His face went through a terrifying transformation. Confusion, then shock, then a dawning, horrified recognition. He looked at my eyes, really looked at them, and saw the child he had dismissed staring back at him with the eyes of an executioner. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked small. He looked old. Brooke went white. All the blood drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. But then, I saw it, in the depths of her panic. A spark lit up. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. She wasn't just scared. She was calculating. She was already running the numbers. figuring out if this new reality was a threat or an opportunity she could leverage. Victor Hale did not move. He did not gasp. He simply closed his notebook, capped his pen, and sat back, looking from Dean to me with the cold, detached interest of a man watching a car crash he isn't involved in. Constance? Dean choked out the word. It sounded foreign in his mouth. That is impossible. You left. You disappeared. I was nothing. I finished for him. And now, I am the one holding the checkbook. I sat back down, regaining my composure, smoothing the front of my jacket. Now, I said, my voice returning to pure business. Let us talk about the real numbers. Because unlike you, Dad, I did my homework, and I know exactly what CoreWeave is made of. The door to the conference room clicked shut, sealing the heavy silence behind Dean, Brooke, and Victor. They had walked out in a daze, a trio of ghosts who had just seen their past materialize to haunt them. I did not watch them go. I did not offer a handshake. I simply stood at the head of the table, waiting until the vibration of their footsteps faded into the carpet of the corridor. Then, I turned to Marisol. Trigger the technical due diligence clause. I said, my voice was flat, stripped of the emotion I had just weaponized. I want access to their repositories within the hour. If they hesitate, remind them that the term sheet they just agreed to gives us full forensic access to their intellectual property. Marisol nodded. She did not ask if I was okay. She knew that right now. I was not a daughter. I was a surgeon preparing to open a chest cavity. Get the forensic team. I added, I want the clean room. 2 hours later, we were in the secure data lab on the 44th floor. It was a windowless room kept at a chill 65 degrees. Lit only by the glow of wall-to-wall monitors, 3 of my best engineers sat at the terminals, their fingers flying across mechanical keyboards. They were the kind of people who saw code as a living organism. They could spot a mutation or a scar in the syntax from a mile away. Marisol stood next to me as the data from Hunter Ridge began to populate on the main screen. We have the source code for CoreWeave, she said, access granted by their CTO. It seems Dean did not have time to warn them to scrub it. Good. I said, peel it back. I did not want to see the user interface. I did not care about the glossy dashboard they showed clients. I wanted the skeleton. I wanted the logic that held the muscles together. Run an architectural fingerprint analysis. I ordered, compare the metadata against known open-source libraries. I want to know what they built and what they borrowed. The lead engineer, a man named Chen, who spoke in quiet murmurs, typed a command. Lines of code scrolled down the center screen like a digital waterfall. It is messy. Chen noted, the top layer is recent. Lots of patches, quick fixes, sloppy variable naming. It looks like they have been trying to force-feed modern data streams into an engine that was not designed for them. Dig deeper, I said. Go to the root. Chen initiated a history rollback, stripping away the comments from the last 3 years, then 4, then 5. We watched the code simplify, shedding the bloat of recent incompetence. Suddenly, Chen stopped typing. That is strange, he said. What is it? Look at the import history. The core logic, the actual engine that processes the data sharding, was not built iteratively. It appears all at once in the version history. I stepped closer to the screen. Show me. He pointed to a timestamp. It was from 12 years ago. One day, the repository was empty. The next day, a massive block of complex, fully formed code was committed to the main branch. It was an import. Marisol observed. They did not write it. They moved it from somewhere else. Open the source directory, I commanded. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a slow, heavy thud that echoed in my ears. I had a suspicion, a dark, impossible thought that was clawing its way up my throat. Chen tapped a key. The file tree expanded. There, buried under 3 layers of obfuscated folder names, was the original root directory. It had been renamed in the production build, but the metadata preserved the original tag from the import. The text on the screen was glowing green. Harmless and small, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. Capstone Rebuild. The room seemed to tilt. Constance Hunter. Capstone, my senior project at the Lakefront Institute. I stopped breathing. I stared at the screen, my vision tunneling until all I could see were those characters. I reached out and touched the glass, as if I could wipe the truth away. "Open it," I whispered. Chen opened the folder. I knew this code. I knew it like I knew the lines of my own palms. I saw the recursive loop I had agonizingly optimized during a snowstorm in my junior year. I saw the specific, idiosyncratic way I had named my variables, using a shorthand based on Latin roots that nobody else used. I saw the comment lines I had written to myself, little notes of encouragement or frustration that I had forgotten to delete. Optimize for latency later. Focus on stability. It was my code. It was the adaptive data sharding protocol. The project I had built on the refurbished laptop I bought with lawn mowing money. The project I had left on a backup drive in my bedroom when I ran away from home. Dean had not just dismissed my talent, he had stolen it. He had waited until I was gone. He had found the drive. He must have shown it to one of his engineers, maybe even the CTO, and asked if it was usable. And they had taken it. They had taken the work of the artist's daughter, the one who wasn't tech material, and they had made it the engine of their entire company. CoreWeave was a lie. Hunter Ridge Systems had survived for the last decade on the intellectual property of the girl they had laughed at. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to grip the back of Chen's chair to stay upright. It wasn't just theft. It was the violation. It was the absolute, total hypocrisy of a father who would look his child in the eye and tell her she was worthless, all while cashing the checks her mind had written. "Boss?" Marisol's voice came from far away. "Constance?" I blinked, forcing the room back into focus. Marisol was looking at me with alarm. She saw the folder name. She put the pieces together instantly. "It is a 98% match," Chen said, his voice hesitant. "They just wrapped a new UI around it and renamed the variables in the upper layers. But the kernel? It is identical." I straightened up. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. "This is a Class 1 intellectual property violation," Marisol said, her voice hard. "Constance, we can bury them. If we file a suit, we can prove authorship. The timestamps on your original university submission will predate their commit by 6 months. We can shut them down. We can freeze their assets. Dean would face criminal liability for fraud." I looked at the code. I looked at the legacy of my sleepless nights, stolen and repurposed to keep my father's ego afloat. "If I sue," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, "the company collapses." "Yes," Marisol said, "immediate bankruptcy." "And the employees?" I asked. "The 300 people working in Kansas City? The engineers who don't know the code is stolen? The support staff? They lose everything," Marisol admitted. I closed my eyes. I saw my mother. If Hunter Ridge collapsed, the family assets would be seized. Diane would be left with nothing. She would be collateral damage in a war she didn't start. I could destroy him. I could walk into a courtroom and burn his legacy to the ground with a single USB drive. It would be justice. It would be poetic. But it would be messy. And it would make me just like him, careless with the lives of others. "No," I said, opening my eyes. Marisol looked at me, stunned. "No? Constance, he stole your life's work." "I know," I said, "and he is going to pay for it, but not with a lawsuit. Not yet." I turned to Chen. "Download everything," I ordered. "Make 3 copies on encrypted drives. Document every line of code that matches. Build a side-by-side comparison that a 5-year-old could understand. I want a report that proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Hunter Ridge is nothing but a hollow shell built on my architecture." I turned back to Marisol. "We are not going to sue," I said. "We are going to hold this. It is a weapon," she realized. "It is the nuclear option," I corrected. "And I'm going to keep my finger on the button. I want this report ready for the closing meeting. When we sit down to sign the deal, This does not go to the lawyers. It goes on the table in front of him. I looked back at the screen, at the folder named ch_capstone_rebuild. He told the world I had no talent, I said softly, tracing the letters on the screen. He told me I was weak. I turned away from the monitor, walking toward the door. So why is it, I asked the empty air, that his entire empire is standing on my shoulders? The board of directors for Glassren Analytics does not meet often. When they do, it is usually to pop champagne over a quarterly earnings report or to authorize the acquisition of a smaller competitor. But on this particular Tuesday, there was no champagne. The mood in the conference room was as sterile and cold as a surgical theater. 7 pairs of eyes stared at me from around the circular glass table. These were people who measured the world in profit margins and risk assessments. They did not care about narratives. They cared about the bottom line. Sterling, the chairman of the board, leaned forward. He was a man who had made his fortune in steel before pivoting to tech. And he had the bedside manner of a sledgehammer. "Constance," he said, his voice grating against the silence. "I am looking at the numbers for this Hunter Ridge acquisition, and quite frankly, I am struggling to find the logic. You are asking us to approve an emergency liquidity injection of $50 million into a company that is hemorrhaging cash. Their client base is eroding. Their leadership is unproven. Why are we prioritizing this carcass over the Kestrel Dynamics merger we discussed last month?" I kept my face impassive. Though my pulse was hammering against the collar of my silk blouse, I could not tell them the truth. I could not say, because the CEO is my father, and the code they are running on is stolen from my hard drive. If I revealed the personal connection now, before the deal was signed, it would be a conflict of interest so severe I would be removed from my own company pending an investigation. I would lose control, and if I lost control, Dean would get away with it. It is an asset play. "Sterling," I said, keeping my voice level, "Hunter Ridge is undervalued because of poor management, but their proprietary architecture, Core Weave, is perfectly suited to plug the latency gaps in our current stack. We are not buying the company for its revenue, we are buying it for the engine." Sterling narrowed his eyes. "We have engineers who can build an engine. Why buy a dying horse just to get the saddle?" "Because speed matters," I lied. "To build this from scratch would take 18 months. Acquiring Hunter Ridge gives it to us in 6 weeks. It is a time-to-market advantage." The board murmured. They were not convinced, but they trusted me. I had made them billionaires. That trust was the only currency I had left, and I was spending it fast. "I need 48 hours to finalize due diligence," I said, standing up to signal the end of the interrogation. "If the technical audit does not hold up, we walk. Trust me." I walked out of that meeting with my back straight. But inside, I felt the walls closing in. I was fighting a war on 2 fronts, hiding the truth from my own board and extracting the truth from my family. I retreated to my office, needing a moment of silence, but silence is a luxury I could not afford. Marisol was waiting for me, and the look on her face stopped me dead in my tracks. Marisol does not panic. She solves. So when I saw the tight line of her jaw and the way she was gripping her tablet, I knew we had a problem that money could not fix. "What is it?" I asked, closing the door and locking it. "We have a leak," she said. I frowned. "A leak? In the press?" "No," she said, walking over to my desk and casting her screen onto my monitor. "A data leak. I was running a passive monitor on the Hunter Ridge network to keep an eye on their asset stability. I started seeing irregular encrypted traffic leaving their servers about 3 hours ago." She pointed to a jagged red spike on the graph. "Someone inside Hunter Ridge is bundling sensitive documents and pushing them out through a secure port." She explained, "It is not random. It is targeted. What are they sending?" I asked, stepping closer to the screen. Marisol tapped a key. "Expanding the packet headers, our term sheet," she said, "the valuation draft, the due diligence schedule, and your personal itinerary for the closing." My stomach dropped. This was not just a breach. This was corporate espionage. Someone was taking the internal strategy of Glassren and feeding it to the wolves. "Who is the recipient?" I asked. Marisol hesitated, then pulled up a routing map. The signal bounces through 3 proxy servers in Eastern Europe to scrub the origin, but the final destination server helps us narrow it down. It is a Dropbox owned by a shell company registered in Delaware. And who owns the shell company? We dug into the registry. Marisol said, "It is a subsidiary of Kestrel Dynamics." Kestrel, the rival who had been poaching Hunter Ridge's clients. The rival Sterling wanted me to merge with. They are trying to sabotage the deal. I realized, if Kestrel knows our valuation and our timeline, they can outbid us. Or worse, they can leak the financial instability of Hunter Ridge to the press and drive the stock price to zero before we can sign. Trace the source. I ordered, I want to know who inside Hunter Ridge is pressing the send button. Marisol began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. While she worked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message. Sender. Brooke. Message. Connie, I know things were tense at the meeting. Dad is just overwhelmed. I would love to buy you dinner tonight. Just the 2 of us. Sisters. No business. Please. We have so much to catch up on. I stared at the screen. The timing was impeccable. A sisterly dinner invitation arriving at the exact moment our deal was being sabotaged. It felt too coordinated. It felt like a distraction. It was a soft trap, designed to get me away from my screens, to lower my guard with nostalgia and white wine while the knife was being twisted in my back. I got it, Marisol said, her voice cutting through my thoughts. I looked up. The encryption was good, she said, but they got sloppy with the device ID. The packets are originating from a tablet registered to the executive pool at Hunter Ridge, specifically, the chief operating officer. Brooke, I whispered, my sister, the woman who had just texted me about catching up. She wasn't just incompetent. She was actively betting against her own father. She was selling the details of our rescue mission to the highest bidder. But why? If I save the company, she keeps her job. If Kestrel buys it— Wait, Marisol interrupted. There is more. Brooke is the origin. But she is not sending it directly to Kestrel. She is routing it through a relay. She is sending the data to a private server first. Whose server? Marisol highlighted a node on the map. It was a residential IP address in a high-end district of Kansas City. It belongs to Victor Hale, Marisol said. The picture snapped into focus like a camera lens twisting sharp. Of course, Victor Hale, the board member who stood with the wind. He was the broker. Brooke was terrified. She knew the company was dying, and she didn't trust me, or didn't know me well enough, to save it. So she panicked. She stole the data and gave it to Victor. Victor was using it to cut a side deal with Kestrel. If Glassren walked away, or if Kestrel outbid us, Victor and Brooke would have a golden parachute. They would sell the company for parts, hand the client list to Kestrel, and walk away with a payout while Dean was left holding the empty bag of a bankrupt legacy. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. And it was exactly the kind of business instinct Dean claimed I never had. I looked at the text message from Brooke again. Just the 2 of us. Sisters. She was keeping me occupied. She wanted to look me in the eye, smile, and talk about our childhood while she sold my company's secrets to my competitor. Constance? Marisol asked. Do we shut down the port? Do we block the transfer? No, I said, my voice cold. Let the data flow. If we block it, they will know we are watching, but they are compromising the deal. Marisol argued. Let them. I said. I picked up my phone and typed a reply to Brooke. Reply. I would love that. 7 o'clock, the Omni. See you there. I put the phone down and looked at the map of the data leak. This was no longer just a family drama. This was not just about a father who didn't love me. This was a commercial war. Brooke had decided that her survival required my destruction. She thought she was playing a clever game with Victor Hale. She thought she was the predator. She did not realize that by inviting me to dinner, she was inviting the only person who knew exactly how the code, and the game, was written. Get the car ready. Marisol, I said, turning away from the screen. I am going to have dinner with my sister, and I need to make sure I'm hungry. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early. It was one of those places where the lighting was kept intentionally dim to flatter the clientele. And the menu had no prices, because if you had to ask, you were in the wrong zip code. I did not choose a secluded booth in the back. I chose a table right in the center, facing the main entrance. It was a tactical position. I wanted to see her before she saw me. I wanted to watch her transition from the street to the stage, to see the moment she put her mask on. When Brooke walked in, she looked like a woman holding her breath. She smoothed her skirt, checked her reflection in the maitre d's podium, and then pasted a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. She walked toward me, navigating the tables with that practiced grace she had perfected in debutante classes while I was home learning to code. "Connie," she breathed, leaning in to kiss the air beside my cheek. "You look intimidating, in a good way." I did not stand up. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit down, Brooke." She sat, unfolding her napkin with jittery fingers. She ordered a bottle of white wine without asking me, a reflex of control she probably didn't even know she had. "I am so glad you agreed to this," she started, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Dad is a mess, Connie, truly." After the meeting, he just sat in his office staring at the wall. "He is old. He is scared. He talks about you. You know? He wonders where he went wrong." I took a sip of water, watching her perform. She was trying to weave a narrative of a broken family that just needed a little glue and a large check to be whole again. She talked about Mom's garden. She talked about the summer house we used to rent. She was throwing every sentimental anchor she could find to see which one would snag on my conscience, but I was listening for what she wasn't saying. She did not ask about the due diligence. She did not ask about the $50 million valuation. She did not ask if the board was going to approve the deal. That was the tell. If you are drowning, you ask about the lifeboat. You ask if the rope is strong enough. The only reason you do not ask about the lifeboat is if you have already arranged for a helicopter to pick you up. I set my glass down, the sound sharp against the tablecloth. "Stop," I said. Brooke blinked. Mid-sentence. "Stop what?" "Stop the nostalgia tour." I said, "I did not come here because I miss the way we used to ignore each other at breakfast. And I certainly didn't come here to help you rewrite history. You are not here because you love me. You are here because you are terrified of losing your position." Brooke stiffened. "That is not fair. I am trying to bridge the gap. You are trying to manage me." I corrected. "You are trying to soften the ground so that whatever happens next won't look like a burial." She went quiet. The waiter arrived with the wine, pouring it into her glass. She drank half of it in one swallow. She didn't argue. She didn't ask about the terms of the deal. She just looked at me with a mixture of fear and defiance, like a child waiting to see if she had been caught. We finished the meal in silence. When the check came, I paid it. It was a power move, and we both knew it. "Come to my office," I said as we stood up. "Now?" she asked, checking her watch. "It is 9 o'clock. "Now," I said. "We have unfinished business." We took separate cars. When she walked into my office 20 minutes later, the city was a grid of gold lights below us. Marisol was there, standing by the desk. She didn't say hello. She simply handed me a file folder and left the room, closing the door with a click that sounded like a lock engaging. I threw the folder onto the glass table between us. It landed with a heavy, flat thud. "What is this?" Brooke asked, eyeing the folder like it was a bomb. "It is a log of outbound data packets from your personal tablet," I said. Brooke froze. Her hand hovered over the folder, then retracted. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice rising in pitch. I walked over and flipped the folder open. The pages fanned out, revealing the charts Marisol had compiled. "At 4 o'clock this afternoon," I said, pointing to the first graph, "you initiated a secure transfer of 3 gigabytes of data, internal financial audits, client lists, the draft of our term sheet." I looked at her. "You didn't send it to your cloud. You sent it to a private server owned by Victor Hale, and from there, it was bounced directly to a Dropbox controlled by Kestrel Dynamics." Brooke's face turned the color of ash. She opened her mouth to deny it, to spin a story, but I cut her off. Don't, I warned. Do not insult my intelligence. We traced the IP. We have the device ID and the timestamp for the final packet. It was 7:15. I leaned in close. You were pouring wine and telling me how much Dad misses me. And at that exact second, your device was finishing the upload that would sell us all out. Brooke looked at the papers. She looked at the timestamps. The evidence was absolute. There was no room for interpretation. The silence that followed was not the silence of a boardroom. It was the silence of a structure collapsing. Then, she exploded. It wasn't a shout. It was a fracture. Her composure shattered, and the woman underneath came spilling out. Ugly, raw, and desperate. You think this is easy? She hissed, tears springing to her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of rage. You think it was a prize to stay? You left Constance. You packed your bag and walked out and left me there with him. She paced the room, her hands shaking. He put everything on me, she said, her voice trembling. Every expectation, every failure. If the stock dropped, it was my fault. If a client left, I wasn't charming enough. I have spent 10 years trying to be the son he wanted, trying to be the genius he thinks he is. But I'm not a genius. Constance, I am just a manager. I am good at people, not product. And I knew. She stopped and looked at me. Her mascara smudged. I knew the ship was sinking 3 years ago, she confessed. I told him we needed to pivot. I told him CoreWeave was outdated. He wouldn't listen. He just kept telling me to sell harder. So yes, I made a deal with Victor. Because when this crashes, and it will crash, I am not going to be the captain who goes down with it. I am 40 years old. I have no equity that is worth anything. Victor offered me a buyout. Kestrel offered me a consulting gig. She slammed her hand on the desk. I was saving myself. Is that a crime? You saved yourself when you ran away. Why am I the villain for doing the same thing? I watched her. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the perfect older sister. I saw a victim. I saw a woman who had been hollowed out by our father's ego just as much as I had. But she didn't have the talent to escape, so she had resorted to treachery. I walked around the desk and stood in front of her. You have the right to be angry, I said, my voice low. You have the right to be scared. You even have the right to hate him. I picked up the file folder and held it up. But you do not have the right to sell me. I said, you do not have the right to use my money and my company as a bargaining chip to buy your parachute. You invited me to dinner to distract me while you put a knife in my back. That isn't survival. Brooke, that is war. Brooke slumped. The energy left her. She looked at the floor. Defeated. So what now? She whispered. You tell the board? I go to jail? I looked at the folder in my hand. I could end her. One call to the SEC, one call to the lawyers, and Brooke Hunter Carlyle would be unemployable for the rest of her life. She would be disgraced. It would be the ultimate revenge for every time she sat silent while our father belittled me. But as I looked at her shaking shoulders, I realized that destroying her wouldn't fix the code. And it wouldn't save the 300 employees in Kansas City who were about to lose their livelihoods because of my family's dysfunction. I have a choice to make, I said. I walked to the shredder in the corner of the room. I held the folder over the slot. I can destroy you, I said, or I can use you. Brooke looked up, her eyes widening. I am going to fix this company, I said, but I am not doing it for Dad, and I am certainly not doing it for you. I am doing it because it is my code that is keeping the lights on. I lowered the folder. I didn't shred it. I tossed it back onto the desk. You are going to help me. Brooke, you are going to be my inside man. You are going to feed Victor false information. You are going to stall Kestrel. And when we walk into that closing meeting, you are going to do exactly what I tell you to do. And if I don't? She asked. Her voice barely audible. I tapped the folder. Then I released the logs. I said, and you won't just lose your job. You will lose your name. I turned back to the window, watching the city lights. Decide, Brooke, are you his daughter, or are you my partner? Because you can no longer be both. The digital clock on my bedside table read 12:45 in the morning. I was not sleeping. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the lights of the city, my mind replaying the image of my sister unraveling in my office. I had spent 10 years building a fortress of solitude, believing that my isolation was the source of my strength, but in the span of 12 hours, that fortress had been breached. First by my father's incompetence, and then by my sister's betrayal. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly. I thought the drama was over for the night. I thought I had cornered every player on the board. Then, the intercom buzzed. I froze. The doorman would never call this late unless it was an emergency. I walked to the wall panel and pressed the button. Yes, Ms. Hunter. The doorman's voice was apologetic. I am sorry to disturb you. There is a woman here to see you. She says she is your mother. My heart stopped. Diane Hunter had not left Kansas City in 5 years. She did not travel. She did not drive in the city. She existed within the perimeter my father had drawn for her. Send her up, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I opened the door before she could knock. Diane stood in the hallway. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or perhaps I had just grown used to the inflated proportions of my memories. She was wearing a trench coat over a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a hasty knot. Her eyes were red, rimmed with the exhaustion of a flight taken on impulse, but they were dry. She was not crying. There was a terrifying calmness about her. The stillness of a woman who has walked through a fire and decided she no longer cares about the heat. In her hands, she clutched an old shoebox. It was battered, the corners reinforced with tape. May I come in? Constance? She asked. Her voice was the same, soft, melodic, the voice that used to hum in the kitchen while Dean shouted in the study. I stepped aside. She walked into the penthouse, her gaze sweeping over the minimalist furniture, the floor-to-ceiling glass, the cold perfection of my life. She did not comment on the luxury. She walked straight to the living room coffee table and set the shoebox down. I thought you were asleep, I said, closing the door. I have been asleep for 30 years, she replied, turning to face me. I woke up today. She pointed to the box. Open it. I sat down on the white sofa. The cardboard felt rough under my fingers. I lifted the lid, expecting to see old photos or perhaps jewelry, the standard currency of maternal guilt. Instead, I saw envelopes, dozens of them, hundreds, maybe. They were stacked in neat rows, bundled with rubber bands. The paper was yellowed with age. I picked up the top bundle. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was hers, and on every single envelope, written in her careful script, was my name. Constance Hunter, Lakefront Institute, Dorm 4B. Constance Hunter, 405 West, Erie Street, Apartment 2. Constance Hunter, Glass Wren Analytics. I looked at the postmarks. Some were from the week I left. Some were from last month. I don't understand, I said, my throat tight. I never received these. I know, Diane said. She remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. Dean took them. I looked up at her, the letters heavy in my hand. Every morning, she continued, her voice steady. He would check the mail before I could, or he would intercept the outgoing post. He told me you returned the first few. He said you wrote a note saying you wanted nothing to do with us. He said we had to respect your space. He told me that if I kept trying, I would only push you further away. She took a breath, a shuddering intake of air. I believed him. For a year, I believed him. But then I found them. He wasn't returning them. He was hoarding them. He kept them in a locked drawer in his office, like trophies. He wanted to be the only link between us. He wanted to be the narrator of why you left. I looked down at the letters. I pulled one out from 5 years ago. I tore it open. My dearest Connie, I saw an article about a woman in Chicago who made the under 30 list. The photo was grainy, but I knew it was you. I am so proud. I cut it out and put it on the fridge. But your father took it down. He said it wasn't you. He said you were working IT support in Ohio. But I know my daughter. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and fast. I had spent a decade hating her silence. I had constructed a worldview where my mother was a coward who chose her husband over her child. I didn't know she was speaking to me the whole time, screaming into a void created by the man we both feared. "Why now?" I asked, wiping the tear away. "Why bring these tonight?" "Because Brooke called me," she said. She was hysterical. She told me about the meeting. She told me about the code. Diane walked over to the table and reached into the box. She pushed the stacks of letters aside and pulled out something small from the very bottom. It was a USB drive, not a sleek, modern thumb drive, but a bulky gray stick from 12 years ago. The plastic was scratched. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. I stared at it. It looked like the drive I used for backups in college. "The night before you left," Diane said, placing the drive in my palm. "You were asleep. Your laptop was open on the desk. You had been working for 3 days straight. You looked so exhausted. But you looked happy. You never looked happy in that house. Constance, only when you were coding." She touched the drive. "I didn't know what it was. I don't understand computers. But I knew it was important. I knew it was the thing that made you strong. And I knew your father. I knew that if you left, he would try to take everything from you. So while you were sleeping, I put this in and copied the folder on your desktop. It took an hour. I was terrified he would walk in." She looked me in the eye. "I kept it in the shoebox. I thought, one day, she might need this. One day, he might try to say he built it." My hand closed around the drive. It was warm. This wasn't just data. It was proof. It was proof that while my father saw a product, my mother saw me. She didn't understand the code, but she respected the labor. She had protected my intellectual property not because of its value, but because of its author. "But that is not all," Diane said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was legal paper, heavy and bonded. "When Dean started the company," she said, unfolding the paper on the table, "my father gave him the seed money. You didn't know that. Dean likes to tell people he bootstrapped it. But it was my inheritance that bought the first servers." She smoothed the paper flat. "My father was a lawyer. He didn't trust Dean's ambition. He insisted on a clause in the original incorporation papers. It is called the Intellectual Property Integrity Provision." She tapped a paragraph on the second page. "It says that if the CEO is found to have committed fraud, theft of trade secrets, or gross ethical misconduct regarding the company's core assets, the voting rights of the silent partner, me, are immediately activated. And not just activated, they are weighted at 51% for the purpose of leadership removal." I read the text. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was clear. Diane Hunter wasn't just a housewife. She was the failsafe. She was the kill switch. "I have never used it," she whispered. "I was afraid. I was afraid of breaking the family. I was afraid of being alone. But tonight, when I realized he stole from you, when I realized he built our entire life on a theft from his own daughter," she straightened up. And for the first time, she looked like a giant. "I am not strong like you. Constance, I cannot walk into a boardroom and negotiate a billion-dollar deal. I cannot write code, but I can open the cage. I can unlock the door that I have been living behind for 30 years. She pushed the document toward me. "You don't need to sue him to destroy the company. You just need me to sign this. If I sign this, I fire him. Tomorrow morning." I looked from the document to my mother. I realized then that I had been wrong about everything. I thought I was a self-made woman. I thought I had pulled myself up from the dirt by sheer force of will. But I hadn't. I had been held up. I had been protected by a woman who hid letters in a shoebox and stole data in the middle of the night because she believed in my future more than she feared her present. I stood up and wrapped my arms around her. She felt fragile, like a bird, but her arms tightened around me with a strength that shocked me. We stood there in the center of my empire, holding on to each other. Two women who had survived the same man in different ways. Thank you, I whispered into her hair. Don't thank me, she said, pulling back and gripping my shoulders. Just finish it. Make it right. I looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. The sky outside was turning a deep, bruised purple. I walked to my desk and picked up my phone. I dialed Marisol. She answered on the first ring. I am awake, she said. What is the move? I looked at the USB drive in my hand and the legal document on the table. Do not pull the term sheet, I said, my voice ringing with a new kind of authority. Not the coldness of a CEO, but the certainty of a daughter who has found her name. We are still acquiring them? Marisol asked, surprised. We are acquiring them, I said. But we are rewriting the terms. Tear up the old agreement. Draft a new one. I looked at Diane. She nodded. We are not just buying the assets. I told Marisol. We are conducting a hostile takeover from the inside. And Marisol? Yes? Add a seat to the board, I said. For Diane Hunter. I hung up the phone. The sun was just beginning to crest over Lake Michigan, painting the water in golden fire. The darkness was gone. Dean Hunter had stolen my past, but he could not steal my morning. I turned to my mother. Get some sleep. Mom, I said, we have a meeting at 10 o'clock, and you are going to want to be awake for this. The atmosphere in the main conference room of Glass Ren Analytics was not just tense, it was pressurized. 20 people sat around the elongated glass table. On one side was the Hunter Ridge delegation. Dean, looking pale and hollow. Brooke, staring fixedly at her hands. And Victor Hale, checking his watch with the arrogance of a man who believes he has already won. On my side sat my board of directors, my legal team, and Marisol. And sitting directly to my right was Diane Hunter. When Dean had walked in and seen his wife sitting at the head of the table next to the CEO, he had stumbled. He had tried to ask her what she was doing there, but she had simply adjusted her glasses and told him to sit down. It was the first time in 30 years I had seen him obey her without question. I stood up. I did not open with a greeting. I did not offer coffee. I placed a single document in the center of the table. We are not here to negotiate, I announced, my voice carrying to the corners of the room. The previous term sheet is dead. We are here to discuss the terms of surrender. Victor Hale scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Surrender? That is dramatic. Constance, we have a competing offer from Kestrel Dynamics. If you want to play hardball, we will walk. I ignored him. I looked directly at Dean. I have drafted a new acquisition agreement. I said, it contains 7 non-negotiable clauses. Clause 1. Glass Ren. Analytics will acquire 100% of Hunter Ridge Systems for a cash price of $45 million. Dean winced. That is $10 million below the previous valuation. It is also $5 million more than Kestrel is actually offering you once they strip out the liquidation fees. I countered. It is a fair price. It covers your debts. It protects your shareholders. But it is not a gift. I turned the page. Clause 2. I continued. This is the employee protection mandate. Glassren guarantees the retention of all 312 current employees of Hunter Ridge for a minimum period of 24 months. There will be no layoffs. There will be no restructuring for the sake of cosmetic accounting. We are buying the talent, and we are keeping the talent. Dean looked surprised. He had expected me to gut the company. He had expected me to treat his people the way he had treated me. Clause 3, I said, and the room went very quiet. Dean Hunter will immediately resign from all executive functions. He will retain the title of Founder Emeritus. He will have no voting rights. He will have no operational authority. He will not have a key card to the building. Dean's face flushed a deep, angry red. You cannot do that. I built this company. We will get to what you built in a moment, I said coldly. Clause 4. I went on, turning my gaze to Brooke. Brooke Hunter Carlisle will be removed from the position of Chief Operating Officer effective immediately. Brooke flinched, but she did not look up. However, I added, softening my tone just a fraction, she will be offered a choice. She can resign with a standard severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. Or, She can stay on as a strategic advisor for a probationary period of 12 months, under direct supervision, to help transition the client relationship she manages. But she will have no access to financial data. I waited. Brooke looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. She nodded slowly. She understood. It was a lifeline. I was giving her a chance to learn the job she should have started at the bottom of. Clause 5. Victor interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. The board will never approve this. We are walking. Dean, get up. We are going to Kestrel. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. I am glad you brought that up. Victor, I said, because Clause 5 is about you. I signaled to Marisol. She walked over to the large monitor on the wall and pressed a key. The screen flooded with the data logs from the previous night. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is a record of a data breach that occurred yesterday evening. It shows confidential Glass-Ren documents being routed from a device inside Hunter Ridge to a private server owned by Victor Hale, and then forwarded to a Dropbox belonging to Kestrel Dynamics. The room erupted. The lawyers on the Hunter Ridge side began whispering furiously. Victor turned white. That is fabricated, he sputtered. It is forensic fact. I corrected, and it is a felony. Corporate espionage, insider trading, fraud. I looked at the Hunter Ridge lawyers. If Mr. Hale is not removed from this room and from your board immediately, Glass-Ren will file criminal charges against him and name Hunter Ridge as a co-conspirator. You will be tied up in litigation for 10 years. Your stock will be worth 0 by lunchtime. The lead lawyer for Hunter Ridge stood up. He looked at Victor. Mr. Hale, he said, his voice icy. I think you should leave. Victor looked around the room for an ally. He looked at Brooke, who turned her face away. He looked at Dean, who was staring at the screen in horror. You are all making a mistake, Victor hissed. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out. The door slammed behind him, and the silence that followed was heavy with the realization that the power had shifted permanently. Now, I said, turning back to Dean, let us discuss the final 2 clauses, the ones regarding the asset itself. I picked up the shoebox from the floor and placed it on the table. I took out the gray USB drive and held it up. Clause 6, I said, acknowledgement of intellectual property. I plugged the drive into the secure port on the table. The screen changed. On the left was the source code for CoreWeave. On the right was the code from the drive, my capstone project from 12 years ago. The match percentage was displayed in bold red letters, 98%. CoreWeave was not developed by Hunter Ridge. I stated, it was imported from a personal drive belonging to Constance Hunter. It was stolen, repackaged, and sold as proprietary technology. Dean sank into his chair. He looked small. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a man caught in a lie he had been telling for a decade. Why? I asked him. It wasn't for the lawyers. It was for me. Why did you say I had no talent, and then build your empire on my work? Dean looked at the screen. He looked at the code that had saved his company a dozen times over. Because it was perfect, he whispered. I leaned in. Excuse me? I looked at it, he said, his voice cracking. That day in the study, I looked at what you built, and I knew you were already better than me. He looked up, his eyes wet. I was scared. Constance, I was the visionary. I was a genius. If my teenage daughter could write better code than my entire engineering team, who was I? So I crushed you. I thought if I made you small, I could stay big, and then when you left, the company was failing. We needed a miracle, and I had your drive. He put his head in his hands. I took the letters, too. He confessed, his voice muffled. I blocked Diane's letters because I knew if you came back, you would see what I had done. I had to keep you away to keep the lie alive. The room was silent. Even the lawyers had stopped taking notes. It was a tragedy of ego. A father devouring his children to feed his own insecurity. Diane stood up. She reached into her purse and pulled out the yellowed legal document she had shown me the night before. I am invoking the intellectual property integrity provision of the original partnership agreement. she stated, her voice shaking but clear. As the silent partner, and in light of this admitted fraud, I am exercising my super voting rights. She looked at the Hunter Ridge board members. I vote to remove Victor Hale from the board. I vote to accept the acquisition offer from Glassren Analytics in full. And I vote to accept the resignation of Dean Hunter, effective immediately. She looked down at her husband. It is time to stop. Dean, it is over. Dean looked at her, then at me. He nodded slowly. He took the pen from the table. His hand was shaking, but he signed the resignation letter. I watched him sign. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel a surge of victory, but all I felt was relief. It was like setting down a heavy weight I had been carrying for half my life. I picked up the main contract. Clause 7. I said quietly, "The future of CoreWeave." I signed the document. The product will be pulled from the market today. It will be rebuilt from the ground up by the engineering team at Glassren, properly credited and properly licensed. We will not run on stolen time anymore. I capped the pen. I looked at Brooke. She was wiping her eyes. I looked at Dean. He was staring at the table, a man without a kingdom. But perhaps, finally, a man who could learn to be a father. The deal is done, I said. The lawyers began to shuffle papers. The board members stood up to shake hands. I walked over to my father. He stood up, looking unsure of what to do with his hands. "Constance," he began. Do not apologize," I said, cutting him off. "Apologies are just words. You are good at words. Dad, you are good at selling things that aren't real." I gestured to the door. "You are retired now. You have time. You have a wife who waited 30 years for you to be honest. You have a daughter who needs to learn who she is when she is not pretending to be you." I looked him in the eye. "I am leaving the door open. I am not locking you out. But you do not get to walk through it just because we share a last name. You have to earn it. Prove to me that you can be Dean Hunter, the father, not Dean Hunter, the CEO." I turned to Diane and squeezed her hand. She smiled, and it was the brightest thing in the room. Then I turned to Marisol. "Let us get to work," I said. "We have 300 jobs to save." I walked out of the conference room, out of the shadow of the past, and into the light of the office that I had built, brick by brick, on my own terms. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Nina Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.